The jungle held its breath during the Vietnam War, but for the brave pilots of the U.S. Army, the air itself became a silent grave. Decades later, the silence remains, the most chilling enemy the American military ever faced. My name is Alex Vance. I spent 20 years chasing ghosts in the dusty archives of the Pentagon, and another 10 trekking through the humid shadows of Southeast Asia. I was searching for the definitive answers to 5 enduring military mysteries, the lost helicopter squadrons, whose fate was swallowed whole by the conflict. I didn't seek closure for myself. I sought accountability for those who never came home and those who waited in vain. Our story of Lost Horizons begins in 1968 with the Ghost Patrol. The Asha Valley was a throat of dense, humid misery, a key infiltration route leading straight into Hue. Lieutenant Michael Jensen, call sign Rattler 1, led the Ghost Patrol, 3 AH-1 Cobra gunships tasked with providing close air support for a small, critical, long-range reconnaissance patrol insertion. They went in hot and fast at twilight. The ground fire was minimal but steady, enough to keep the pilots focused on evasion, not communication. I sat across the table from Sarah Jensen, Michael's daughter. She was 60 now, her face etched with the specific sorrow of an unresolved grief. On the table lay a single reel-to-reel tape, meticulously preserved. "He promised me a puppy," she whispered, her voice dry. "When he came home." I pressed play on the ancient recorder. The air immediately filled with the sputtering static of field radio communications, overlaid with the distinct whipping sound of Huey rotor blades far in the distance. A voice, crisp and professional, cut through the noise. Rattler 1. Base, we are commencing final approach at grid coordinate Foxtrot 69er. Visual confirmation on the LRP team. We see movement. Then, silence. Not the silence of a transmission ending, but the sudden, violent death of sound. It was like a needle abruptly lifted from a record, leaving a vacuum where sound should have been. The subsequent 20 minutes of the recording were nothing but the frantic, escalating cries of air traffic control begging for a response. It wasn't enemy fire, I told Sarah. If they had been hit by a heavy surface-to-air round, there would have been a distress call, a flare, or at least the sound of the explosion transmitted through the open mic. The official report suggests a simultaneous systems failure caused by high-altitude fog and ground effect disorientation. Sarah shook her head slowly. My mother always said that was rubbish. She listened to the tape every night for a year before she finally gave it to the military. She said they cut mid-sentence, Alex. What was he about to say he saw? That was the crux of the Ghost Patrol. 3 Cobras, highly specialized, highly armored, simply evaporated. When the search and rescue team finally breached the dense triple canopy jungle 2 days later, after heavy fighting, they found nothing. No wreckage, no debris field, no smoke, no burn marks, not even the faint scent of aviation fuel. My investigation led me to a former CIA analyst who had been stationed in Da Nang. He spoke only under the condition of anonymity, meeting me in a cafe in Bangkok 15 years after the war ended. We knew they saw something they weren't supposed to see, the analyst said, stirring his cold coffee. The mission wasn't just infiltration, it was observation. We suspected the NVA had moved something massive into the valley, something that required absolute secrecy. We thought it was a new radar installation, maybe mobile heavy artillery. He paused, leaning closer. But the last word Rattler 1 spoke, before the cutoff, you only hear it if you strip the static layer by layer. It wasn't movement. It wasn't enemy. It was structure. A structure. Something fixed, vast, and silent, built deep within the forbidden territory of the Ashao. If the NVA had perfected a way to instantaneously jam or disable the entire electronic signatures of 3 advanced aircraft simultaneously, it was a terrifying secret they would protect with unimaginable violence. The Ghost Patrol hadn't crashed. They had been neutralized and likely captured or vaporized before they could finish their sentence. The Ghost Patrol became a footnote. 3 unlucky pilots lost to the fog of war. But the investigation into that structure immediately led me down the winding, haunted paths of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the colossal failure of Operation Phantom Down. Operation Phantom Down, late 1970. This wasn't about small, fast gunships. This was about heavy lift and high-value cargo. A massive CH-47 Chinook helicopter, call sign Phantom 7, was ferrying critical assets, not just personnel, but sophisticated communications equipment and several high-ranking intelligence officers deep into a protected sector of the trail. The flight manifest was classified above top secret, requiring a special presidential waiver just to view the redacted summary. What was clear was the scale of the loss. Phantom 7 disappeared without a trace of distress or emergency beacon, miles from known enemy air defense positions. The prevalent theory, fiercely resisted by the U.S. Army, was that the Chinook had been brought down intact, or nearly so, and its content salvaged. I tracked down General Viet, a spry, sharp-eyed man who had commanded a key North Vietnamese sapper regiment near the sector where Phantom 7 vanished. He was now living in Hanoi and surprisingly willing to talk, driven perhaps by a sense of historical responsibility or simply old age. "We did not shoot it down, Mr. Vance," General Viet stated flatly during our tense meeting in his sparsely furnished living room. "Not in the air. The Americans used the jungle like a blanket, covering their movements. But we had eyes and ears, and we had the deep mud." He confirmed that his unit was alerted by local villagers, not to an explosion, but to a massive noise, a tearing sound, followed by intense, low-frequency vibrations hours later. They moved toward the sound for 3 days. "When we arrived," he said, tapping a polished wooden cane, "the wreckage was buried deep in a sinkhole. The jungle floor simply gave way. The Americans call it karst geology. We call it a gift." The general confirmed the NVA salvage operation took nearly 2 weeks, carried out under the cover of monsoon rains. They used buffalo and ropes, recovering not bodies, but the critical equipment, the high-value assets. "The intelligence officers survived the initial fall," General Viet continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We found their weapons dropped nearby, meaning they attempted to fight after crawling out, but they were executed later." What interested Hanoi most were the devices, the encryption machines, the guidance systems, the communication codes. They gave us access we did not have before. This explained the sudden, terrifying efficiency of NVA attacks in the subsequent months. They seemed to know exactly when and where U.S. patrols would move. Phantom 7 hadn't been lost. It had been harvested. The U.S. military, knowing the intelligence implications, couldn't admit the loss was due to an environmental disaster exploited perfectly by elite NVA retrieval units, especially not when the enemy had gained a massive technological advantage from the wreckage. They filed it under missing presumed lost due to hostile fire near target zone, closing the public record and opening a decade of secret counterintelligence paranoia. But the salvage operation, terrifying as it was, didn't explain the crews who vanished without even a sinkhole to blame. This took me to the map room, specifically to a geographical curse known internally among SAR pilots as the Battlefield Bermuda Triangle. This area was a specific, ill-defined patch near the border where Vietnam met Cambodia, a nexus of trails, tunnels, and deep river gorges. It wasn't just that aircraft was lost here, it was the failure rate of the search and rescue teams trying to find them. I met Captain Dale Hudson in Texas, a former Jolly Green Giant pilot, scarred not by shrapnel, but by repeated exposure to operational futility.
"We called it the meat grinder," Hudson said, his eyes scanning the empty diner. "It was like the atmosphere fought us. We lost 3 Hueys and one of our own Jolly Green transport birds trying to recover the crew of just one downed observation helicopter, the Raven 41.
Hudson recounted the psychological torture of flying into that sector. Radios would spontaneously fail. Compasses would spin wildly, even the simple magnetic backups. Altitude readings would jump erratically, often indicating they were 500 feet higher than they physically knew they were.
"The weather reports were worthless," he elaborated. "You'd go in under clear skies, and within 5 minutes, you'd hit a microburst of wind so violent it could rip the main rotor off."
It wasn't jungle weather, it was localized chaos. And the ground fire? It wasn't coordinated. It was just constant, peppering fire that felt like it was targeting your specific instruments, not your fuselage. The investigators at the time debated extreme gravitational anomalies, or perhaps sophisticated, localized NVA electronic countermeasures. But the key piece of evidence Hudson showed me, pulled from a classified after-action report, was the repeated description of ghost contact. In 3 separate failed SAR missions, Hudson said, pointing to the faded text, pilots reported seeing what they believed was the wreckage of Raven 41. They'd fly toward it, mark the coordinates, and descend. But when they reached the ground level, the smoke, the debris, it was gone, replaced by pristine jungle. The Battlefield Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a deadly area. It seemed actively engineered to deceive and destroy the rescue efforts, causing the SAR teams to push their aircraft past structural limits or fly straight into heavily concealed anti-air nests while chasing phantoms. The relentless, coordinated, yet untraceable loss of aircraft trying to find other aircraft indicated something far beyond standard guerrilla tactics, a perfect storm of environmental exploitation and advanced psychological warfare that bled the U.S. air resources dry, one lost mission at a time. The investigation into the triangle forced me to confront the next, most unsettling mystery: the clear signature of advanced, unidentified Cold War technology. The focus shifted northeast toward the Laotian Corridor, 1971. This region was critical for interdiction, where U.S. transport helicopters ferried supplies, fuel, and troop rotations. This was the target of the 4th mystery: the swift and untraceable destruction of an entire transport unit, 4 heavily loaded slicks, in under 2 minutes. The losses occurred during daylight hours, clear visibility, and over relatively friendly territory. A momentary lapse in operational security the NVA would exploit brutally. The official military explanation pointed to a coordinated heavy-caliber ambush utilizing 12.7mm and 14.5mm machine guns. But the forensic evidence, reviewed much later by independent defense analysts, told a different story. There was no sound on the radio intercepts, no distress, just the instantaneous cessation of 4 transponders almost simultaneously, followed by silence. Crucially, ground patrols investigating the crash sites later found something peculiar. The wreckage was not shredded by explosive shells or perforated by ballistic rounds. The metals were stressed, melted in unusual patterns, and the internal electronic systems of all 4 aircraft were completely fused, as if hit by a massive, non-kinetic shockwave.
I tracked down Dr. Eris Chen, a retired physicist who had worked briefly for the Defense Intelligence Agency on foreign technology acquisition during the late 70s. He specialized in Soviet-era weapon systems.
"It wasn't artillery, Alex," Dr. Chen confirmed, adjusting his spectacles. "The damage profile was textbook EMP, or perhaps a directed energy weapon, a prototype."
Dr. Chen explained that both the Soviet Union and China were experimenting heavily with high-power microwave systems and electromagnetic pulse technology during that period. The goal was simple: to disable high-tech Western aircraft without leaving any signature that could be definitively traced back to their sponsors.
Imagine a weapon that projects a focused, intense electromagnetic field, he instructed. It doesn't blow the aircraft up with fire. It cooks the circuits, instantly neutralizing every navigational, communication, and control system simultaneously. The pilot is left flying a dead metal husk at cruising speed. The resulting impact is cataclysmic, but the cause looks like structural failure, or maybe just bad luck. Dr. Chen showed me blurred, grainy surveillance photographs taken by an SR-71 Blackbird months after the incident of a bizarre temporary structure deep in the Laotian jungle, resembling a massive parabolic dish mounted on a mobile chassis, quickly disassembled. The intelligence suggested the NVA had been provided with this weapon, possibly as a field test, to target U.S. logistical lines. It was used once, perhaps twice, with devastating efficiency. The test was deemed successful, and the weapon was pulled out. This incident was the price of that success. The U.S. military classified the event under the highest levels of secrecy, not just because of the 4 lost helicopters, but because admitting the enemy possessed such a weapon would require a massive, expensive overhaul of every aircraft's shielding systems, escalating the Cold War technological race exponentially. The easy answer was machine guns. The terrifying truth was silence delivered by physics. The sheer volume of secrets, technology, and calculated geopolitical silence woven into these 4 mysteries eventually pointed me toward the ultimate and most painful revelation: the post-war intelligence failure. This was the closure the Pentagon never granted. It wasn't about equipment failure or enemy tactics. It was about political calculation and the deliberate withholding of truth. My search for the Ghost Patrol and the Phantom Down crew led me into the deepest vaults of the Defense Prisoner of War Missing in Action Accounting Agency, DPAA, and eventually to an anonymous source, a clerk who had spent 30 years digitizing and cross-referencing files, marked permanently restricted. The source provided me with access to highly sanitized excerpts from a massive, multi-volume report compiled in 1978 during early diplomatic talks with Hanoi, a document codenamed Project Cinder. Project Cinder detailed the precise location and circumstances of several U.S. losses that were known to the North Vietnamese government. The U.S. negotiators, eager to establish diplomatic ties and secure vital trade concessions, were often presented with specific evidence about captured or downed servicemen. The clerk confirmed that Cinder contained a definitive, actionable file on at least 1 lost squadron, specifically the 4 transport helicopters lost near the Laotian corridor, Mystery 4. The North Vietnamese offered to return the remains and provide the exact location of the crash site. They even offered to confirm the nature of the weapon used, in exchange for a specific, very high-value trade concession regarding machinery exports, the clerk whispered to me over a secure line. I stared at the heavily redacted document summary on my screen. It confirmed the negotiation existed.
What happened? I asked. The Secretary of State at the time decided the cost of the trade concession and, more importantly, the diplomatic fallout of confirming Soviet bloc advanced weapons usage in the war was too high, the source explained bitterly. They couldn't afford to escalate the tech panic or lose the political capital gained by normalizing relations. The decision was made at the highest level. The information was permanently withheld from the public, and the squadron remained missing in action, fate unknown. The Pentagon calculated that confirming the deaths and recovering the remains, while morally necessary, would have destabilized the fragile political landscape and harmed future economic goals. The truth was sacrificed on the altar of policy. This meant that for 50 years, the families of those 4 crews, wives, children, brothers, and sisters, were told nothing. They lived on the hope that their loved ones might still be held captive when the government had known since 1978 exactly where their bodies lay and exactly how they died. I flew back to the United States and sought out Sarah Jensen again, the daughter of Rattler 1 from the Ghost Patrol. I told her about Project Cinder, about the diplomatic calculus, and about the terrible silence. My father's unit, the Ghost Patrol, she asked, her voice cracking. Was their location in Cinder?
No, I admitted, looking down. That mystery remains absolute. They disappeared too cleanly, too violently, too early in the war. Whatever structure or system took them, the NVA covered their tracks perfectly. Their fate was not negotiable. I explained that the truth about the missing was not one narrative, but 5 separate wounds. The technological void that swallowed the Ghost Patrol whole in the Aishao, the systematic harvesting of secrets after Operation Phantom Down, the engineering of chaos and deception in the battlefield Bermuda Triangle, the cold, clean kill delivered by unacknowledged Cold War weaponry near Laos. And finally, the unforgivable sin, the conscious, political decision to leave the remains of brave men to the jungle rather than risk a diplomatic ripple. Sarah stood, her hand resting on the tape recorder that still held her father's clipped final transmission.
I don't want the apology, she said, her voice steady now, hardened by 5 decades of waiting. I want the history corrected. I want the records unsealed.
They may have been forced to fall silent over the jungle, Alex, but we cannot be silent now. My investigation was ultimately an attempt to close a decades-old wound in American military history. The jungle may still hold its secrets, but the true burden of the mystery lay not in the fog of war, but in the calculated, enduring silence maintained by those sworn to protect the memory of those missing in action. We began with the breath held by the jungle, and we end with the hope that through relentless truth, the air can finally be cleared.